The blood on Emma Donovan's hands had dried, leaving crimson crescents beneath her fingernails as she sat in the dust of White River, Montana territory, clutching her husband's worn leather boots. The year was 1876, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desolate Main Street. Her tears had carved clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks, but she'd stopped crying hours ago. There was nothing left inside her now but a hollow ache. He walked proud, didn't he? Emma looked up at the tall cowboy standing over her, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. She didn't recognize him, but she recognized the respect in his voice. His spurs jingled softly as he shifted his weight. "Yes," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. Yes, he did. Kyle Lawson had ridden into White River that morning, drawn by rumors of silver strikes and opportunity. Instead, he'd arrived to witness a funeral procession, and a widow left alone in the world. Something about her stillness, her dignity even in grief, had compelled him to approach when others kept their distance. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the space beside her on the rough-hewn porch steps of the general store. Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak again. Her husband Thomas had been dead 3 days now, shot in the back while breaking up a fight at the saloon where he'd worked as a barkeeper. He'd been a good man, everyone said so. Too good for a place like White River. Kyle sat, respecting her silence. He was trail-worn, his clothes dusty from riding, but there was a gentleness to him that seemed at odds with his weathered appearance. "I don't know you," Emma finally said, her fingers tightening around the boots. "No, madam, Kyle Lawson, just rode in from Idaho territory." He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair. "I'm sorry about your husband." "Thomas," she said, as if naming him might somehow keep him in the world a little longer. His name was Thomas Donovan. "Thomas," Kyle repeated solemnly. "Were you married long?" "2 years." Emma looked down at the boots again. They still held the shape of his feet, as if at any moment he might walk up and claim them. He wanted to save enough to buy land, start a ranch, have children. The town of White River continued its business around them, though people gave them a wide berth. A town that had seen its share of death, yet never grew comfortable with its company. "You have family here?" Kyle asked. Emma shook her head. "We came west together. My parents are back in Ohio." The thought of writing them, of telling them that their fears about the dangerous western territories had proven true, made her stomach twist. What will you do now? It was the question that had been haunting her since the doctor had pronounced Thomas dead. The room they'd rented above the Mercantile wasn't hers anymore. She couldn't afford it on her own. The small amount of money they'd saved wouldn't last long. "I don't know," she admitted, the words bitter on her tongue. Kyle nodded, understanding the precarious position of a woman alone in a frontier town. The owner of the hotel mentioned he's looking for help, cleaning rooms, serving meals. Emma's pride bristled. She'd been a schoolteacher back east, had come west with dreams of her own. But pride wouldn't feed her or keep a roof over her head. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, finally looking directly at him. Kyle met her gaze, his blue eyes clear and steady. "Because somebody should." The simplicity of his answer, the lack of ulterior motive she could detect, made her throat tighten. She looked away across the dusty street to where the undertaker's shop stood, its business completed for the day. "I buried him this morning," she said. "These boots, they were his favorite. I couldn't bring myself to bury them with him. Silly, isn't it?" "No, madam, not silly at all." A wagon rattled past, kicking up dust that settled on her black mourning dress. Emma didn't bother to brush it away. Nothing seemed to matter much anymore. "You have a place to stay tonight?" Kyle asked. The question brought her back to her immediate concerns. "Just tonight. I have to be out by tomorrow." Kyle stood, settling his hat back on his head. Let me walk you there. Then I'll speak to Mr. Henderson at the hotel about that position." Emma looked up at him, this stranger who had appeared when she was at her lowest. "Why would you do that?" "Like I said, madam, your husband walked proud. Seems to me the least the living can do is honor the dead by looking after what they held dear." Something in his words, in the respect they conveyed, allowed Emma to accept his help when she might have refused another's. She gathered Thomas's boots and stood, her legs stiff from sitting too long. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson." "Kyle, please." "Kyle," she repeated, testing the name. "I'm Emma Donovan." As they walked the short distance to the boarding house, Emma clutched the boots to her chest like a shield. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time since Thomas fell, she felt a tiny spark of something other than despair. She didn't know then how this man would change her life, or how the town of White River would witness a love story born from the ashes of tragedy. She only knew that for one more night she had a place to sleep, and for the moment, that was enough. The position at the Frontier Hotel was far from ideal. Mr. Henderson was a stern employer, and the work was backbreaking, scrubbing floors, changing linens, and serving meals to weary travelers. But Emma was grateful for the small room in the attic, and the meals included with her meager wages. She had sold most of her and Thomas's belongings, keeping only his pocket watch, his mother's Bible, and those worn leather boots. Kyle had found work at the livery stable, his way with horses quickly earning him the respect of the owner. White River was growing as prospectors and settlers continued to push west, and good horsemen were valued. He kept his distance from Emma, respecting her grief, but their paths crossed often in the small town. 6 weeks after Thomas's death, Emma was serving breakfast in the hotel dining room when Kyle entered, his hat in his hands. "Morning, Mrs. Donovan," he said politely, taking a seat at an empty table. "Mr. Lawson," she acknowledged, pouring him coffee from the heavy pot she carried. "The special is flapjacks this morning." "That sounds fine." Emma noticed the cut above his eye, the bruise forming on his cheekbone. "You're hurt," Kyle shrugged. "Had a disagreement with a fellow who thought it was acceptable to mistreat his horse. He disagreed with my assessment of the situation." "Did you win?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, surprising them both. The corner of Kyle's mouth twitched. "Let's just say the horse won. New owner as of this morning." Emma found herself almost smiling for the first time in weeks. "I'll get your breakfast." When she returned with his food, Kyle cleared his throat. "Mrs. Donovan, I was wondering if you might like to attend the town social on Saturday. As friends," he added quickly. "I thought you might enjoy the music." Emma stared at him. The idea of socializing, of music and dancing seemed from another lifetime. "I don't think that would be appropriate," she said stiffly. "My husband would want you to live," Kyle said gently. "Just as a friend, Emma, nothing more." The use of her given name startled her. It had been so long since anyone had called her anything but Mrs. Donovan or girl when Mr. Henderson was displeased. "I'll think about it," she said finally, moving away to serve other customers. That night, alone in her small attic room, Emma sat on the edge of her narrow bed and looked at Thomas's boots, still sitting where she had placed them the day she moved in. What would he think of her now? Would he understand how lost she felt without him? The town social came and went, and Emma did not attend. But the following week, when Kyle mentioned that the traveling preacher was giving a sermon by the river on Sunday, she surprised herself by agreeing to accompany him. It was a warm June day, the Montana sky vast and blue above them. The townspeople gathered on blankets and chairs, children playing at the water's edge while the preacher spoke of hope and resilience. Emma sat rigidly beside Kyle, aware of the glances and whispers. A widow appearing in public with another man, even for a church service, was bound to cause talk. "Ignore them," Kyle murmured, seeming to sense her discomfort. "People will always talk. It's what they do when they have empty lives." "Is that what you think of White River, that the people have empty lives?" Kyle considered the question. "I think people everywhere are looking for meaning. Some find it, some don't. Some create their own. And what about you? What meaning are you looking for?" His gaze was direct, unflinching. "I wasn't looking for anything particular when I rode into White River. Now I'm not so sure." The implication hung between them, unspoken but clear. Emma looked away first, focusing on the preacher's words about new beginnings. After the service, they walked slowly back toward town, stopping at the small cemetery where Thomas was buried. Kyle waited respectfully while Emma straightened the wildflowers someone had placed on the grave. "He was kind," she said suddenly. "Thomas. He never raised his voice to me, not once. He wanted a better life for us, for the children we planned to have." Her voice caught. "Now I wonder if I should have been satisfied with what we had." "You couldn't have known," Kyle said quietly. "No, but I pushed him to come west, to work extra hours at the saloon for more money." Emma touched the simple wooden cross that marked the grave. "I wonder if he would have lived longer if he'd married a woman with fewer dreams. Or maybe your dreams were what he loved about you." Emma looked at Kyle, surprised by the insight. "Maybe," she conceded. "I'll never know now." Summer turned to autumn, and Emma's grief, while never truly gone, began to settle into a dull ache rather than the sharp pain of fresh loss. She continued working at the hotel, saving every penny she could. Kyle remained at the livery stable, earning a reputation as the best horse trainer in the county. They developed a friendship of sorts, taking Sunday walks and occasionally sharing meals at the hotel restaurant. The town watched with interest and, in some cases, disapproval. Emma was aware of the gossip but found she cared less with each passing day. Kyle's quiet companionship had become a comfort she wasn't willing to sacrifice to protect her reputation. In early October, a fire broke out in the stable. Kyle was injured saving the horses, suffering burns to his hands and arms. Emma heard the news from a hotel guest and rushed to the doctor's office where he was being treated. Dr. Miller was just finishing bandaging Kyle's arms when Emma burst in. "How bad is it?" she demanded, her heart racing at the sight of Kyle's pain-etched face. "He'll live," Dr. Miller said dryly, "though he might wish otherwise for the next few days. Burns are nasty business." Kyle attempted a smile. "I'm fine, Emma. Just a bit singed around the edges." Relief made her knees weak. She pulled up a chair beside him. "What happened?" "Lantern got knocked over. Could have been much worse if we hadn't caught it quick." He winced as Dr. Miller applied salve to a burn on his neck. "You'll need someone to change these bandages daily," the doctor said, "and keep them clean. Infection is the real danger now." "I can do that," Emma said without hesitation. Both men looked at her with surprise. "Mrs. Donovan, while I appreciate your Christian charity, it wouldn't be proper," Dr. Miller began. "I'll come to your office," Emma interrupted, "or wherever is appropriate. But I know how to change bandages. I nursed my father through typhoid before I was married." Dr. Miller considered her, then nodded reluctantly. "Very well. Once a day here at my office. And Mr. Lawson, you're to rest those arms. No work for at least 2 weeks." Kyle groaned. "Doc, I can't afford. I've already spoken to Mr. Harrison. He's holding your position and says to tell you the horses are asking after you." The doctor packed away his supplies. "Now, Mrs. Donovan, if you'll help our patient back to his lodgings, I'll expect to see you both tomorrow morning." Emma helped Kyle to his feet, careful not to touch his bandaged arms. They walked slowly back to the boarding house where he rented a room. "You don't have to do this," Kyle said as they reached the porch. "I'm sure Dr. Miller could find someone else." "You want someone else?" Emma asked directly. Kyle met her gaze. No. The simple honesty of his answer made her breath catch. Then I'll see you tomorrow at the doctor's office. For the next 2 weeks, Emma faithfully changed Kyle's bandages each morning before beginning her work at the hotel. They talked during these sessions, really talked, in a way they hadn't before. Kyle told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, and making his way west working cattle drives. Emma shared stories of her childhood in Ohio, her dreams of adventure that had led her to marry Thomas and head west. As Kyle's burns healed, something new grew between them, something neither was ready to name, but both felt with increasing certainty. The first snow fell in November, transforming White River into a pristine landscape of white. Emma stood at the hotel window, watching children slide on the frozen puddles in the street. Kyle had returned to work weeks ago, his arms scarred but functional. They still took their Sunday walks when weather permitted, and sometimes shared dinner at the hotel. Mr. Henderson approached as she stood there, his perpetual frown deepening the lines around his mouth. Mrs. Donovan, a word. Emma turned, sensing trouble. Yes, Mr. Henderson. It has come to my attention that you have been spending a considerable amount of time in the company of Mr. Lawson. Emma straightened her spine. We're friends. You're a widow of less than 6 months, and this is a respectable establishment. He sniffed disapprovingly. I've overlooked it until now, but Mrs. Peterson and several other regular guests have expressed concern about your moral character. Anger flashed through Emma. My moral character is not in question, sir. I have done nothing inappropriate. Nevertheless, appearances matter. Either you terminate this friendship, or I will have to reconsider your position here. Emma stared at him in disbelief. You're asking me to choose between my only friend in this town and my livelihood. I'm asking you to behave with the propriety expected of a woman in your situation. His tone softened slightly. Mrs. Donovan, I understand your loss was significant, but there are standards of behavior that apparently don't apply to men, Emma finished for him. Mr. Peterson spent 3 hours in the saloon last night and came back so drunk he couldn't find his room key, but his wife questions my character. Mr. Henderson's face reddened. That is quite different. No, it isn't. Emma untied her apron. I quit, Mr. Henderson. I'll be gone by morning. The words left her mouth before she'd fully considered the consequences, but once spoken, she couldn't take them back, nor did she want to. Months of grief, of struggling to survive, of accepting condescension from people like Henderson and his guests, had finally reached a breaking point. Don't be foolish, girl. Where will you go? What will you do? Henderson's concern was more for himself than for her, she knew. Good help was hard to find in White River. I'll manage, Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt. She handed him the apron. I'll finish my shift today. That evening, Emma sat on her bed in the tiny attic room, reality setting in. She had exactly $12 saved, nowhere to go, and winter was settling in with a vengeance. Thomas's boots sat in the corner, a reminder of all she had lost. A knock at her door startled her. Mr. Henderson never came to the servants' quarters. Emma, are you in there? Kyle's voice was low, urgent. She opened the door, surprised to see him standing there, snow melting on his shoulders. Kyle, you shouldn't be up here. Henderson told me what happened. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his face tight with concern. Is it true, you quit? Yes. Emma closed the door, acutely aware of how improper it was to have a man in her room. He told me to stop seeing you or lose my position. I chose to leave. Kyle ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing on end. Emma, you shouldn't have done that, not for me. I didn't do it for you, she said, though it wasn't entirely true. I did it because I'm tired of people telling me how to grieve, how to live, who I can talk to. Thomas is gone and I'm still here and I have to figure out how to keep going. Where will you go? Emma gestured helplessly. I don't know yet. I have a little money. Maybe I can find work in another town. No, Kyle's voice was firm. I have a better idea. What? Marry me. Emma's breath left her in a rush. What? Kyle stepped closer, his eyes intense. Marry me, Emma. Not because you need a place to stay or because I can provide for you, though I can, but because I think we could build something good together. Kyle, this is madness. We're friends, yes, but are we just friends? He took her hand, his touch gentle despite his calloused palms. Because I don't think about you the way I think about friends. I think about your smile, the one you try to hide when I say something foolish. I think about how brave you are, sitting in the dust holding Thomas's boots that day, not falling apart even though you had every right to. I think about how I want to be the one who makes sure you never have to be that alone again. Tears filled Emma's eyes. I'm still grieving him. I know. And I would never ask you to stop. He'll always be part of you, part of your story. Kyle squeezed her hand. But I'm asking if there might be room for me too, for a new chapter. Emma looked at his face, this man who had appeared on the worst day of her life and had somehow become essential to her survival. Not just physical survival, but the survival of her spirit, her capacity for joy. People will talk, she said weakly. People always talk. Let them. Kyle's smile was tentative. What do you say, Emma Donovan? Will you take a chance on a scarred horse trainer with nothing to offer but his heart? The enormity of the decision before her was dizzying. To marry again, so soon after losing Thomas. To face the judgment of the town, the whispers behind hands. But to refuse meant leaving White River, leaving Kyle, starting over somewhere with no connections at all. I need time, she finally said. Not to decide if I care for you, I do. But to be sure I'm making this choice for the right reasons. Kyle nodded, disappointment flashing briefly across his face before he masked it. How much time? Give me until Christmas. It was less than a month away. And in the meantime, I still need to find other employment. The school board is looking for a teacher, Kyle said. The last one left to get married with your experience. Hope fluttered in Emma's chest. Teaching again, it was more than she dared dream. Do you think they'd consider me? I know they would. Mr. Wilkins heads the board. I'll speak to him tomorrow. Emma felt a rush of gratitude mixed with something deeper, warmer. Thank you. Kyle stepped back, his hand reluctantly releasing hers. I should go before Henderson comes looking for me and finds another reason to disapprove of you. At the door, he paused. I meant what I said, Emma. I believe we could build something good together. But whatever you decide at Christmas, I'll respect it. After he left, Emma sat for a long time, her thoughts a tangled mess of past and potential future. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering White River in a blanket of pristine white, as if offering the town and Emma a clean slate. The school board appointed Emma as the new teacher the following week, impressed by her credentials and experience. She moved into the small room attached to the schoolhouse, grateful to be out from under Henderson's disapproving gaze. The work was challenging but fulfilling, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Emma felt she was contributing something meaningful to the community. Kyle kept his distance publicly, respecting her need for time and space to make her decision. But he left small gifts, a book of poetry, a tin of hard candies, a beautiful red scarf outside her door. Each one came with a note sharing something he admired about her, or a memory of their time together that had meant something to him. As Christmas approached, Emma found herself thinking less about what the town would say and more about what her heart was telling her. She visited Thomas's grave, now dusted with snow, and spoke to him as if he could hear. I miss you every day, she said softly. I always will, but I'm starting to understand that loving you and finding happiness again aren't mutually exclusive. She traced his name on the wooden marker. I think you'd like Kyle. He's a good man. Not perfect, he's too stubborn sometimes, and he has a temper when it comes to injustice. But he's kind and honest, and he makes me laugh. The cemetery was silent except for the distant sound of church bells. Emma continued, I'm afraid, Thomas. Afraid of loving someone again and losing them. Afraid of what people will say. But I'm more afraid of closing my heart forever. Snow began to fall, soft flakes catching on her eyelashes. Emma brushed them away, along with her tears. I think I'm going to say yes, she whispered. I hope you understand. Christmas Eve arrived with a heavy snowfall that blanketed White River in several inches of pristine white. Emma dismissed her students early, sending them home with candy sticks and excited chatter about Santa Claus. As she tidied the classroom, hanging the children's artwork depicting nativity scenes and snowmen, she heard the door open behind her. Kyle stood there, snow on his hat and shoulders, his face flushed from the cold. Miss Donovan, he said formally, aware that they might be observed by passing townspeople. Mr. Lawson, she replied with equal formality, though her heart quickened at the sight of him. He removed his hat, revealing hair that had grown longer since summer, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. I was wondering if you'd made a decision. Emma set down the drawings she'd been organizing. I have. Kyle waited, his expression guarded, hopeful. My answer is yes, Emma said softly. Yes, I'll marry you. The transformation in his face was immediate joy breaking through like sunrise. He took a step toward her, then stopped, remembering where they were. You're sure? You won't regret it. I'm sure I want to try. I'm sure I care for you deeply. Emma moved closer to him. The rest we'll figure out together. Kyle reached for her hands, squeezing them tightly. When? New Year's Day, she suggested. A fresh start. 1 week, Kyle said, wonder in his voice. 1 week and you'll be my wife. The words sent a flutter of nerves and excitement through Emma. Wife. She would be someone's wife again, not Thomas's, but Kyle's. It felt strange, yet increasingly right. There's something I want to show you, Kyle said. Can you bundle up and come with me? It won't take long. Curious. Emma wrapped herself in her coat and the red scarf Kyle had given her. They walked through town, past the curious glances of the few people braving the snow, and toward the outskirts where the land opened up into rolling plains. A small cabin stood about half a mile from town, smoke rising from its chimney. A corral beside it held 2 horses, including Kyle's sturdy buckskin gelding. What is this place? Emma asked as they approached. Mine, Kyle said, a note of pride in his voice. Ours if you like it. I've been working on it for the past month, whenever I could get away from the livery. Stunned, Emma followed him to the door. Inside, the cabin was small but solid, with a main room containing a stove, table, and 2 chairs. A doorway led to a single bedroom. Everything was simple but clean, with thoughtful touches: shelves for books, a rocking chair by the stove, a colorful quilt on the bed that Emma recognized as the handiwork of Mrs. Wilson, the midwife. Kyle, she breathed, turning in a slow circle. How did you manage this? I bought the land from a miner heading back east. The cabin was here but needed work. The town's been helping. Mr. Wilson built the table, Doc Miller gave me the chairs, Mrs. Baker made the curtains. He looked almost shy. They want you to stay in White River, Emma. We all do. Tears pricked her eyes. I thought they all disapproved of me. Some do, Kyle admitted, but more understand that life is too short and too hard out here to deny happiness when it comes along. Emma crossed to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape stretching toward distant mountains. It's beautiful. It needs a woman's touch, Kyle said, coming to stand behind her, and it needs you specifically. Emma turned to face him. "I was so sure I'd never feel this way again. After Thomas died, I thought that part of me died too. And now I know better. The heart is more resilient than we give it credit for." She reached up to touch his face, the face that had become so dear to her. "I want to build a life with you, Kyle, here in this home you've made for us." He bent his head, his lips finding hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Emma answered by moving closer, deepening the kiss, allowing herself to feel the full measure of what had been growing between them for months. When they finally broke apart, Kyle rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Emma." "Merry Christmas," she whispered back, knowing that this was indeed the beginning of something new and precious. They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in the small White River Church. The town turned out in surprising numbers, filling the pews with a mixture of supportive faces and a few disapproving ones. Emma wore a simple blue dress rather than traditional white, acknowledging her previous marriage while embracing her new beginning. Dr. Miller gave her away, an honor that had brought tears to the gruff doctor's eyes when she'd asked him. "Thomas would approve," he'd told her. "He always said you deserved the best of everything." As they exchanged vows, Emma felt a profound sense of rightness mingled with the bittersweet knowledge that she was truly closing one chapter of her life and opening another. Kyle's hands were steady as he placed the simple gold band on her finger, a ring that had once belonged to his mother, his only family heirloom. "I promise to honor your past while building our future," he added to the traditional vows, his voice carrying clearly through the church. "To love you for all of who you are, including the parts that will always belong to Thomas." Emma hadn't expected those words, and they nearly undid her composure. She squeezed his hands in silent gratitude, adding her own improvised vow. "I promise to embrace the unexpected joy you've brought into my life, and to face whatever comes with the courage you've helped me find." The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with the townspeople contributing food and music. Even Mr. Henderson made an appearance, grudgingly offering congratulations and a wedding gift of fine table linens. That night, in their cabin with the fire crackling and snow falling softly outside, Emma and Kyle began their life together with tender discovery and deepening love. As they lay together afterward, Emma curled against Kyle's side. She felt a peace she hadn't known was possible again. "What are you thinking?" Kyle asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That happiness can come from the most unexpected places," Emma said. "That day you found me sitting in the dust with Thomas's boots, I couldn't imagine ever feeling anything but grief again. And now here we are." Kyle's arms tightened around her. "Here we are," he agreed, "and here we'll stay." The winter passed in a haze of newlywed happiness tempered by the practical challenges of frontier life. Emma continued teaching while Kyle worked at the livery stable, saving to buy more horses and expand their small homestead. They settled into routines together, Kyle starting the fire each morning while Emma prepared breakfast. Emma grading papers in the evening while Kyle repaired tack or carved small wooden figures, a hobby he'd developed as a boy. They talked about everything: their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. Kyle spoke of wanting to raise horses, perhaps start a ranch of their own someday. Emma shared her desire to eventually build a proper school for White River, one with enough books and supplies for every child. Spring arrived with a rush of meltwater and new growth. The plains around White River erupted in wildflowers, and Emma often gathered bouquets to brighten their cabin. It was during one such excursion in late April that she realized her monthly cycle was late, very late. She said nothing to Kyle at first, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed. But as another week passed and the signs became unmistakable, Emma could no longer contain her suspicion. "Kyle," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I think I'm going to have a baby." Kyle had been whittling a small horse figure, and the knife stilled in his hand. He looked up at her, his expression transforming from shock to wonder to pure joy. "A baby, you're sure?" "As sure as I can be without the doctor's confirmation. It's been nearly 2 months since." Emma blushed, still somewhat shy about discussing such intimate matters despite their married status. Kyle set aside his project and moved to kneel before her chair, placing his hands on her still flat stomach with reverence. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." Emma covered his hands with her own. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." He looked up at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Are you?" Emma nodded, her own tears spilling over. "Yes, and scared and excited, and 1,000 other things." Kyle rose and gathered her into his arms. "We'll figure it out together, just like everything else." Dr. Miller confirmed Emma's pregnancy the following week, estimating the baby would arrive in November. "Just in time for your first anniversary," he noted with a rare smile. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Lawson." No more lifting heavy buckets or chasing after unruly students. The news spread quickly through White River, bringing a flood of well wishes and advice from the women of the town. Mrs. Wilson promised to knit a layette, while Mrs. Baker offered her services as midwife when the time came. Even Mrs. Peterson, who had been one of Emma's most vocal critics, softened her stance. "Children are God's greatest blessing," she said stiffly when she encountered Emma at the general store. "I'll pray for your safe delivery." As Emma's body changed with the growing life inside her, she found herself thinking of Thomas more often. Would he be happy for her? Would he understand that this new life didn't diminish what they had shared? She kept his boots in a special trunk now, along with his pocket watch and a daguerreotype of them on their wedding day. She wanted their child to know about the man who had been her first love, even if only through stories and mementos. Kyle seemed to understand her conflicted feelings without her having to explain them. One evening in July, as Emma sat darning socks, her rounded belly making the task more challenging, he presented her with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, setting aside her mending. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a beautifully carved picture frame holding the daguerreotype of Emma and Thomas, which Kyle had carefully removed from the trunk and had professionally framed in town. "I thought we could put it on the mantel," he said. "So he's part of our home, part of our family. Our child should know about the man their mother loved first." Emma stared at him, overwhelmed by the gesture. Most men wouldn't want a reminder of their wife's first husband in their home. Kyle shrugged. "I'm not most men, and Thomas wasn't just any first husband. He was the man who brought you west, who loved you enough that your loss of him nearly broke you. How could I not honor that?" Emma rose awkwardly, her balance affected by her changing body, and wrapped her arms around her husband. "I love you, Kyle Lawson, more than I can say." "And I love you, Emma Lawson. All of you, including the parts that will always belong to Thomas." The summer heat gave way to autumn's crisp air, and Emma's belly grew round and firm. She reluctantly took a leave from teaching, as the school board hired a temporary replacement, a young man fresh from university back east, who seemed terrified of the boisterous frontier children. Kyle had been promoted to manager of the livery stable, giving them more financial security as they prepared for the baby. He spent his free time building a cradle and adding a small addition to their cabin to serve as a nursery. On a golden afternoon in early November, Emma felt the first twinges of labor while hanging laundry on the line behind their cabin. The pains were mild at first, easy to dismiss as the false contractions she'd experienced in recent weeks. But by evening, there was no denying that their baby was on its way. "It's time," she told Kyle calmly as he returned from the stable. "You should fetch Mrs. Baker." Kyle's face paled, but he wasted no time in saddling his horse and galloping toward town. He returned within the hour with both Mrs. Baker and Dr. Miller, the latter insisting on attending despite Mrs. Baker's protests that birth was women's business. "Mrs. Lawson is special to this town," the doctor said gruffly. "I'm not taking chances with her or the baby." The labor progressed steadily through the night. Kyle refused to leave Emma's side despite the midwife's insistence that men traditionally waited elsewhere. He wiped her brow, held her hands through contractions, and murmured encouragement when her strength seemed to flag. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," he told her as dawn approached and the pains intensified. "You can do this, Emma. Our baby is almost here." With a final, powerful effort, Emma brought their child into the world just as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the cabin windows. The baby's lusty cry filled the room, bringing fresh tears to Emma's eyes. "A boy," Mrs. Baker announced triumphantly. "A fine, healthy boy." Dr. Miller quickly examined the infant, nodding in approval. "Strong lungs, good color. He's perfect, Mrs. Lawson." The midwife cleaned and swaddled the baby before placing him in Emma's arms. She looked down at the tiny face, so new yet somehow familiar, with a tuft of dark hair like Kyle's, and what she fancied was the shape of her own eyes. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Kyle sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, staring in awe at their son. "He's incredible," he said, voice rough with emotion. "You're incredible." When the doctor and midwife had gone, promising to return later to check on mother and baby, Emma and Kyle lay together on their bed with their newborn between them. "What shall we name him?" Kyle asked, gently stroking the baby's cheek with one finger. Emma had been thinking about this for months. "I was hoping we could call him Thomas," she said hesitantly. "Thomas Kyle Lawson, to honor both the men who shaped my life." She watched Kyle's face carefully, prepared for reluctance or hurt. Instead, she saw his eyes fill with tears. "Thomas Kyle Lawson," he repeated softly. "It's perfect." Little Thomas thrived, growing stronger each day. He had his father's dark hair and determined temperament, but Emma's expressive eyes and quick smile. The cabin that had once seemed so empty to Emma now overflowed with life and love. Kyle proved to be a devoted father, happily changing diapers and walking the floor with a fussy baby so Emma could rest. He often carried Thomas in a sling while he worked around their property, pointing out horses and clouds and trees to the infant as if he could understand every word. By spring, Emma was ready to return to teaching, bringing Thomas with her to school each day. The children adored the baby, taking turns holding him during their lunch break and competing to make him smile. Emma found a new depth to her teaching, imagining what kind of education she wanted for her own son as he grew. Kyle's promotion at the livery stable came with an opportunity to buy into the business as a partner. They discussed it at length, weighing the security it offered against their dream of someday having their own ranch. "We could do both," Kyle suggested one evening as they sat by the fire, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby. "Save what we can from the stable earnings, buy land piece by piece. It might take longer, but we'd be building something that could last generations." Emma loved the way he thought about the future, planning not just for themselves but for Thomas and any siblings that might come along. She had begun to hope for another baby, though she hadn't yet shared this wish with Kyle. I think that's wise, she agreed. And I've been thinking about the school. The town is growing. We need a proper building, more books. I want to approach the school board about fundraising. Kyle nodded encouragingly. You should. This town needs people with vision, people willing to build something that will last. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door, unusual for the late hour. Kyle rose to answer it, his hand instinctively checking the position of the pistol he kept on a high shelf since Thomas had been born. Sheriff Daniels stood on their porch, his expression grim. Evening, Kyle. Mrs. Lawson, sorry to disturb you so late. What's happened? Kyle asked, inviting the man inside. Got word from the marshal over in Helena. They captured that gang that's been hitting banks throughout the territory. The sheriff removed his hat, turning it in his hands. Thing is, they found some personal effects on one of them. A pocket watch with the initials TD engraved inside. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Thomas's watch, the one that had gone missing when he was killed. The one she'd assumed had been stolen by his killer. They're bringing the man here, the sheriff continued. For you to identify the watch and him. Name's Jed Harmon. Mean son of a sorry madam, mean character. Claims he won the watch in a poker game, but the marshal thinks he might be connected to your husband's to Thomas's death. The room seemed to tilt around Emma. Kyle was at her side instantly, his arm steady around her waist. When? Kyle asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Day after tomorrow. I wanted to give you time to prepare. Sheriff Daniels looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Lawson, you don't have to do this if it's too difficult. Emma straightened, drawing strength from Kyle's presence and from the sight of her son sleeping peacefully, unaware of the shadow from the past that had suddenly fallen across their home. No, she said firmly. I want to. I need to. After the sheriff left, Emma sat at the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Kyle poured 2 glasses of whiskey, setting one before her. Are you sure about this? He asked gently. Emma took a sip of the fiery liquid, letting it burn away the shock. Yes. If this man had something to do with Thomas's death, I want to look him in the eye. I need to know. Kyle nodded, understanding her need for closure. I'll be with you every step. 2 days later, Emma stood in the sheriff's office, Kyle at her side, as 2 marshals brought in a handcuffed man with hard eyes and a sneer that didn't quite mask his nervousness. Sheriff Daniels placed a familiar pocket watch on his desk. Mrs. Lawson, is this the watch that belonged to your late husband? Emma picked it up with trembling fingers. The silver was tarnished now, but the engraving inside the cover was unmistakable. To Thomas, all my love, Emma. Yes, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. This was Thomas's watch. The sheriff turned to the prisoner. Harmon, you want to change your story about winning this in a poker game? Jed Harmon spat on the floor. Ain't changing nothing. Some drunk in a saloon lost it to me fair and square. In White River? Kyle asked sharply. Harmon's eyes shifted. Maybe. I don't remember. Been in a lot of saloons. Was it before or after you shot the barkeeper? One of the marshals asked conversationally, Harmon's face contorted with anger. I never said nothing about shooting nobody. No, but you just confirmed you were in White River, the marshal said smoothly. And now Mrs. Lawson has identified the watch that was stolen from her husband the night he was shot breaking up a fight in the saloon where he worked. Emma stared at the man, this stranger who might have been responsible for altering the course of her life so dramatically. She had imagined Thomas's killer many times a monster, a demon, someone obviously evil. Jed Harmon was just a man, unshaven and unwashed, with desperation in the lines of his face. Did you kill him? She asked suddenly, the question bursting from her before she could reconsider. Harmon looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. "Lady, I've done a lot of things I ain't proud of. Robbing, fighting, stealing, but I never shot no barkeeper." He nodded at the watch. "Won that off a fella named Cates the night before we left town. Skinny guy, scar on his chin. He was flashing it around, betting big. Said he'd gotten it off a dead man." Emma gasped. Billy Cates. The name came back to her from the fog of grief that had surrounded Thomas's death. A drifter who had been questioned and released for lack of evidence, who had left town shortly after. Sheriff Daniels cursed under his breath. "We had him right here, and I let him go." "You didn't know," Kyle said, his hand finding Emma's. "None of us did. The marshals took Harmon away to stand trial for his other crimes. The sheriff promised to send wires to every law enforcement office in the territory with Billy Cates' description. But Emma knew the chances of finding him after more than a year were slim. As they walked home, Emma clutched Thomas's watch tightly. "At least we know," she said. "At least we have this back." Kyle nodded, his expression troubled. "Does it change anything?" Knowing it was this Cates fellow instead of just a nameless stranger. Emma considered the question carefully. "It doesn't bring Thomas back. It doesn't make his death any less senseless. But yes, somehow it matters to have a name, to know the watch is back where it belongs." She looked up at her husband. "Is that strange?" "No," Kyle said, drawing her close as they walked. "Not strange at all. It's human to want answers, closure." When they reached their cabin, they found Mrs. Wilson sitting with baby Thomas, who greeted them with excited babbling and reaching arms. Emma swept him up, holding him close, breathing in his sweet scent. "Everything all right?" Mrs. Wilson asked, noting their serious expressions. "Getting there," Kyle answered, smiling at the sight of his wife and son. "Just tying up some loose ends from the past." That night, after Thomas was asleep, Emma placed the recovered pocket watch in the wooden trunk beside the boots. The past would always be part of her, part of their family story. But as she joined Kyle in their bed, feeling his arms come around her with the familiar comfort of home, she knew with certainty that her heart belonged to the present and the future they were building together. In the years that followed, White River grew from a struggling frontier town into a prosperous community. The railroad came through in 1879, bringing new opportunities and new settlers. Emma's dream of a proper schoolhouse became reality, with Kyle leading the construction effort alongside his growing business at the stable, which he now co-owned. Thomas Kyle Lawson grew from a babbling infant into a spirited boy with his father's love of horses and his mother's quick intelligence. He was joined by a sister, Alina Rose, born on a stormy night in 1880, and later by another brother, William James, in 1883. The small cabin expanded with their family, adding rooms and a covered porch where they gathered on summer evenings to watch the sunset. Kyle's horse breeding business flourished, allowing them to purchase additional land until they had a modest but successful ranch on the outskirts of town. Billy Cates was eventually apprehended in California in 1881, tried and convicted for Thomas Donovan's murder among other crimes. Emma attended the trial, finding a sense of peace in seeing justice done at last. Though the outcome could never truly compensate for what had been lost, through it all the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges, Emma and Kyle built a life rich with love and purpose. The boots that Emma had clutched so desperately on that dusty street remained in their special place, a tangible reminder of the past that had shaped them. On a warm autumn day in 1886, 10 years after that first meeting, Emma sat on their porch watching Kyle teach 9-year-old Thomas how to gentle a spirited colt. Alina, at 6, was helping by offering running commentary from the safety of the fence, while 3-year-old William napped on a blanket beside Emma's rocking chair. "Mama," Alina called, Papa says I can have my own pony for my next birthday. Can I? Emma smiled at her daughter's excitement. We'll see what Papa and I decide, sweetheart. Kyle caught her eye across the corral and winked, his smile as warm and genuine as it had been the day they married. At 40, his hair was beginning to show threads of silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened from years of squinting into the Montana sun. To Emma, he had never been more handsome. She touched the locket at her throat, a gift from Kyle on their 5th anniversary, containing miniature portraits of their children on one side and a tiny snippet from Thomas Donovan's watch chain on the other. A tangible connection between past and present that Kyle had arranged with the local silversmith. Their life wasn't perfect. They had weathered droughts that threatened the ranch, illnesses that had kept them up nights with worry, arguments that sometimes required days to resolve. But they had faced each challenge together, their partnership strengthening with each obstacle overcome. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Kyle finished the day's lesson and sent Thomas to feed the chickens. He crossed to the porch, settling into the chair beside Emma's and reaching for her hand. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, his thumb tracing familiar patterns across her knuckles. Emma smiled, contentment settling deep in her bones. "I was thinking about that day we met, how lost I was, how I never could have imagined this life we've built." Kyle nodded, his gaze taking in their home, their land, their children. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't ridden into White River that day?" "Sometimes," Emma admitted. "But then, I remember something my father used to say, that life has a way of bringing us exactly where we need to be, exactly when we need to be there." She squeezed his hand. "You were where I needed you to be. And you were exactly what I needed, though I didn't know it until I saw you sitting there in the dust, holding those boots." They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. William stirred on his blanket, and Emma lifted him into her lap, his solid weight a comfort against her heart. "He walked proud, didn't he?" Kyle said suddenly, echoing the words he'd spoken to her on that long-ago day. Emma smiled, tears pricking at her eyes, not from grief, but from gratitude for the love she'd known, the love she'd found, and the life that had unfolded in ways she could never have predicted. "Yes," she said, leaning her head against her husband's shoulder as their children's laughter drifted from the barn where Thomas was undoubtedly telling Alina tall tales. "Yes, he did. And so do you, Kyle Lawson, so do you." As darkness settled over the land they'd made their own, Emma Lawson held close the knowledge that life's greatest blessings often came from its deepest sorrows, and that love in all its forms was the thread that bound past to present to future, weaving a tapestry more beautiful and complex than she could ever have imagined on that dusty street in White River all those years ago.